I've got, what, almost 23 years of memories that without alcohol, I had to try to remember. So another thing I wanted to mention as well, except for those people that I'm probably the closest to or around here with the most at the museum during the week, this is the first time I'm even publicly speaking about this. I think most of us who are combat veterans, and especially doing what we did and the stress and strain that was under most of the air crews during the Gulf War, when I left the Navy, I left the Navy. I was burned out. That was one of the contributing factors to my leaving, and as you'll hear shortly here, Desert Storm was everything that could have gone right, and a few things that I wish would have been a little bit more relaxed, but that's the Navy business for you. So, with that said, welcome everybody. To those of you that don't know me, I'm Tony Pequeno. If you've ever seen me around here, I'm one of the people that works in artifacts and restoration. I'm one of the co-managers. I've been with Yankee for 3 years. This was a great place. There she is. This is my wife, Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
My Sicilian connection. To those of you that, you might have seen me around here. We do an awful lot of stuff. I spend most of my life here. If you've seen our F4 tonight, I've been spending more time with her than I have with my wife lately. But my wife is pretty cool about it. To those of you that do know me, I'm sorry. So anyway, but before we get that cranked up, just quickly, Randy gave me plenty of notice about this tonight, and I really lamented over what am I going to talk about, because I had a fairly lengthy Navy career, so much as aviators go. After you leave OCS with the required commitment, most of the pilots or RIOs are obligated to at least 8 years. Some spend at least 10. With both my active duty and reserve, it came close to 15. So I had a very good career. I was winged when I was 23. Anybody here Navy understands what I'm talking besides Randy? Okay, then you probably know what our winging is.
They may not understand the difference between a RIO and a pilot.
Okay, which I will get to. There is a huge difference between RIOs and pilots. Let's start with that. Let's quickly get into OCS, and I'll kind of give you a little bit more about my background before we get to the meat of the matter. When I went to OCS, I think going to hell would have been a vacation rather than spending the first 6 weeks in OCS, which was absolutely miserable. If any of you have ever been there, the first person that greets you is that wonderful drill instructor that you're stuck with for 13 weeks and wish to God he was the devil. I mean, it was brutal. But usually after that first week, you're going to separate from the men from the boys, who can stick it out and who can't. If you survive to the 7th week, you're well on your way. It begins to ease up, and you have to realize you have the confidence in yourself to realize that these people that are training you, you're going to outrank very shortly. So, which, when all is said and done, is a great feeling. What happened during the training and the training that came after, I had to make a decision, because while I wanted to be a pilot, at the same time I was rather intrigued by what being a radar intercept officer was. The term has been around for a number of years. To those that were in the Air Force, the backseater, who when they began using them were actually pilots. They were certified pilots. They were known as the guys in back, or the well, you had electronic warfare officers, weapons systems officers. In fact, the Navy's gone back to the WSO rating. RIO's kind of going to the wayside. But I elected to become a radar intercept officer. And what happens before the end of OCS, or your training after OCS, prior to the winging, if you can't cut it, you become a fallen angel. If any of you are familiar with that, yes. I did not want to be a fallen angel. I wasn't close to being a fallen angel, but I was rather intrigued by what being a REO was going to be. So I changed my occupational specialty and I decided to go ahead and be a REO. And I realized what a dumb mistake, because I never realized I was going to be the one to be in charge when I was in the air, when push came to shove. But anyway, so before we get into this, my beloved VF-84, that is typical of one of the aircraft that I flew. In fact, my 201 is in there from Desert Storm. Interesting story about VF-84, how they came into being. But in 1945, a Navy pilot with VF-17 named Jack Ernie flew over Okinawa. And he developed problems. He had been in heavy combat, and within a couple days, the squadron already had over 100 Japanese kills, and they were going after more. He was having engine problems, oil leaks, and it ended up where Jack ended up getting shot down. And supposedly on the way down, his last words were, "Remember me with the Jolly Rogers." So we fast forward several years, and his wife and sons, as the story goes, gave the Navy his femurs and the skull bones. And there's nothing to say that we actually didn't have them on board ship. And that is how we became associated with the skull and crossbones. I just thought it was kind of a neat little story to throw in there. There's sort of a misnomer that if you're a member of VF-84, you're with an elite group. It's not necessarily true. VF-84 was like any other squadron in the fleet, in Carrier Wing 8. It's just that we had been made more famous because we were portrayed in a couple movies prior to Desert Storm, one of them being The Final Countdown with Kirk Douglas, if any of you has ever seen it. Of course, there's the association with Top Gun, which I, over the years, have gotten sick and tired of the comparisons, because the movie was okay, but Navy life was anything but that. So VF-84 I was very proud to be with, because when I transitioned into the F-14, I was on the Nimitz. And as we will find out here shortly, before too long, after Top Gun, I realized that we were going to be involved very heavily in the Middle East. And the VF-84, along with her sister squadron, VF-41, were transferred to the Roosevelt, and kind of the rest is history. So, and I do have a little piece about the Enterprise. Some of you that know me know I was on the Enterprise. That's part of a different story. But in my earlier days, because I also flew in A6s in Libya, which was my first combat. So anyway, that is basically, did I cover that? Yeah, what a REO was, Radar Intercept Officer. And I was also very lucky too, because at the time I completed OCS, the Navy had several aircraft, whether it was fixed or rotary wing, that were available for us young officers to fly in. Not so much anymore. The Air Force, oh yeah, the Air Force has all kinds of aircraft, but the Navy, right now, the premier fighter is that F-18, and it's a wonderful aircraft. I've seen what they can do firsthand, and they are just amazing. I got a neat little anecdote about them too as we go along. So Kathy, if you will, please. You guys are going to love this.
Do we have sound?
We should. Hey, Steve, where's Steve?
No,
Do we have sound?
no sound.
Oh, no, we got to have sound. Oh, I forgot my other pictures on Nimitz. We'll get Steve to fix it, because you guys got to hear my intro.
That's my airplane in the bottom of the picture.
Yeah. It doesn't want to. There we go. Oh, yeah, we missed the ambiance of the jet noise. No, because we have, don't I have one more on the Nimitz? Had to add the sound effects. It's no fun without it. What was the previous slide anyway? Was the sound on there as well? Okay. No? Go ahead. What is that? Oh, there we go. Okay. Try to make this as entertaining as possible. Okay, now we can go to the next one. Yeah, go ahead. There we are. Catching that last wire. And I can get into a little bit of that too, what it's like catapulting and trapping. Okay, guys, turn it up. Oh, nice going. I hope the girls don't have Powerpuff Girls on there or something. I had to use one of my daughter's laptops. Mine, we had a little issue with. There we go. You're not going to believe what we almost used. And no, if any of you thought I was going to use Danger Zone from Top Gun, guys, I hate the frickin' soundtrack from Top Gun with a passion. So there we are. There's the Middle East and all the areas surrounding the Arabian Peninsula. I was at one time or another, including toward the end of Desert Storm up in the Eastern Med. Okay. Now, Desert Storm. What can be said about Desert Storm? On August 2nd, 1990, some fella named Saddam Hussein decided that he wanted what he called a historical piece of Iraq, and he decided to invade Kuwait. Several tank columns, troops, aircraft decided to wreak havoc, and not to mention the fact that Kuwait was a sovereign domain. Afterwards, Operation Desert Shield took place. Now, to kind of back up on a little history of the region, because there seems to be this general thought among the American public. Everybody wonders, why do we always get involved in everybody's business? It's not necessarily true. Since 1801, the U.S. Navy has been transiting the Persian Gulf at one time or another. So we were building these relationships over the centuries. In 1949, we formally signed policies with the Middle East to protect the region, particularly those areas bordered by the Persian Gulf. So it only made sense for George Bush to go ahead and start sending troops and ships over. Well, at the time, the independents and the Eisenhower groups were already in the Mediterranean. So as the buildup began, and they began assessing exactly what we needed to do to defend Kuwait, and we also received the formal, what do you want to call it? Kuwait formally asked for our help, not to mention Saudi Arabia. Desert Shield took place. On December 28th, the USS Theodore Roosevelt left Norfolk. We left with the America. The America was going to head up toward the Red Sea, replacing the Eisenhower God, I can't think all of a sudden tonight. Who else did I say was there? Independence. So they replaced them. The Roosevelt, on the other hand, went up and went straight into the Persian Gulf, where we took station. In that time, and we also were joining the America, the Ranger, the Saratoga, and there was one other carrier that I can't think of right now. But the thing about the America that was great is she had one capability that a lot of the other ships in the fleet didn't have. She had this wonderful intelligence gathering capability, which was second to none. So as they were gathering intelligence on the forces that were in the region and determining the imminent threat to Saudi Arabia, we were going over and poring over the intelligence. And the one thing that I was very proud of is my time with VF-84 was fantastic in that I really rose through the ranks really quickly. I was very much the volunteer, such as I am now, and I was very happy to be part of a group on the ship along with VF-41 that helped plan a lot of the sorties that we were going to fly. A lot of the stuff would come down through General Schwarzkopf and General Horner, who was the commander of the air assets in the region. and we began to plan what we were going to do in the time we were en route and by the time we came on station. So in the meantime, we had a lot of recce missions that were flying as well into the region. The Marines were gathering a lot of intelligence. The Air Force had really been gathering a lot of intelligence. And so we remained on station sort of watching and waiting for the moment that we were actually going to go in and invade Iraq proper. Now, if I may back up a moment, because I think I'm getting ahead of myself, and I'm sorry, I hope this is making sense, because I got so much that's flooding in here right now. A lot of you probably wonder, and I should have covered this with OCS, what makes somebody like us, like me, decide that we're going to take a career like this? What makes us just not fear death, as it would seem, and want to do this in defense of our country? So if I can indulge you for a minute, let me give you a little bit of the DNA makeup of someone like me. I come from a family that has made a lot of history, both in our nation and overseas. On my mom's side, on Grandma's side, she has an ancestor. His name was George Smith. He signed the Declaration of Independence. We have family members that fought at Brandywine, Trenton, Bunker Hill. We also have a family member that wintered with General Washington at Valley Forge. We have ancestors that fought in the War of 1812, World War I, World War II. On Grandpa's side, Grandpa's family were descendants of Queen Victoria. Also, if any of you are familiar with history, one of my grandfather's descendants was Peter Stuyvesant, or ancestors, I mean, was Peter Stuyvesant. He was the founder of New Amsterdam, which became New York, the state of New York, or New York City. My dad's side, Grandpa was in the Mexican Revolution. He fought with Pancho Villa. He also is believed in our family to be one of the men that assassinated Pancho Villa. Because not only did he show up in the U.S. the afternoon that the assassination took place, the 7 men that did it were never caught. On my grandma's side, and my dad's mom, she was full-blooded Mescalero Apache. If any of us know about the Apaches, we were the nasty ones during the Indian Wars. Us and the Chiricahua, even the Chiricahua didn't like the Mescalero. So on the one side, I have patriotism and volunteerism. On the other side, I have war in my blood. Not to mention on the Mexican side, we did fight at the Alamo. I won't say for who. So it was in my blood. I guess you could say I was destined to do this. So that's kind of what makes people like us do this. It's a sense of duty. So at any rate, let's get back to Desert Storm. So here we are, Desert Storm. We're waiting for the go. Well, at the same time, what comes into the Gulf region with us? None other than the USS Wisconsin and the USS Missouri, 2 of the most famous battleships to see World War II, which also had been retrofitted with Tomahawk cruise missiles. Cool stuff, huh? So, January 17th, 1991, we get the go to start attacking around Kuwait and going into Baghdad. Now I think back at home, you can advance, thank you. I'm supposed to give you your cue, I'm sorry. Back home, oh yeah, there she is, there's the Roosevelt. Go to the next one, please. Nice view of the Roosevelt with the F-14s getting ready to line up and go. Okay, go to the next one. There's my baby. We got the go, and immediately that night, we started launching Tomahawks off of the Missouri and the Wisconsin. Now, I believe the scene at home, from what I found out afterwards, was one of just mass confusion in Baghdad, a lot of AAA going up. I can tell you that that night, we were flying cover for the A-6s that had to go in and take out not only the anti-aircraft batteries, but also the SAM sites that the Iraqis had set up around the Kuwaiti border. I can tell you from an altitude of about 6,000 feet, Baghdad looked like nothing but a red and orange glow. And you could barely see tracers going up, and it looked like a water fountain. It was the most incredible sight I ever saw in my life. As we were continuing to follow the A-6s inland, I could see the streaks that the Tomahawks were making, and I was picking them up on my radar in the back seat. It was at that moment that I realized this thing's real. I mean, this is really happening, because your whole life you trained for this. Now, I saw combat in Libya when I was flying in A-6s, and that was very limited. But this, I mean, we were there for the long haul. You could tell, and you could feel it. But you didn't think about it, you just did it. You weren't scared. Everything, all the training, everything came so automatically. You didn't second guess yourself. So I can tell you the night of January 17th, we just wreaked all kinds of hell on Iraq. Marine A-6s, VF-41 was escorting, if I remember, Marine A-6s further inland to start attacking air bases. And all over, everywhere that I looked from the cockpit, all you could see was these orange and reddish and yellow plumes going up everywhere. They looked like tiny mushrooms. If any of you have ever seen Fantasia and the colors, that's what this looked like from the air. It was the most astounding sight anybody could ever imagine. So, that night, what does Iraq decide to launch at us? Here come the MiGs, kids. So, all of a sudden, our early airborne warning system is calling out and saying, guys, you got bogeys heading in at about 10,000 feet. Oh, by the way, there's about 25 of them. Now, here's the tough thing. At nighttime, go ahead and advance it, please. Which map is that? Will you go to the next one, please? That's the one that shows the ship, all the assets that we had in the region. I think, yeah, there you go. That gives you an idea if you can see the ships, and there's a silhouette of subs where our subs were. Anyway, that night, the hardest thing that I remember as a REO was trying to determine how do I identify between friend and foe. Well, that's why IFF is on aircraft. I think we did a pretty good job that night, and some of the F-18s that were flying just ahead of the A-6s did a pretty good job at breaking up the groups of MiGs. So, you know, the opening night might not sound spectacular, but from the standpoint of someone that was there and witnessed it, it was so incredible because we got done covering the A-6s, and then we got orders to head further inland and see if we could just kind of fish around for more SAM sites. In Vietnam, F-105 pilots did this. It was known as trolling. So I'm thinking to myself, we're going to go trolling. And great, my butt's going to get shot at. Well, it was that night that I began picking up my first SAMs that I ever picked up on my scope. And I can tell you it was kind of an unreal, surrealistic experience. Because to see something heading at you that looks like a cigarette lid on one end, and it's probably doing about Mach 3 towards you, kind of makes you think. But training kicked in and I started firing chaff and flare, and I could see those little flames veer off, one to our starboard, one to about our 11 o'clock position off of port, and I still remember that today with great clarity. I didn't worry about getting shot down, but it wasn't until we trapped about 7 hours later that night and 2 refuels, and we were debriefing, and I'm trying to grab some mess while we're debriefing, and I'm thinking, son of a bitch. There's somebody shooting at me, and they're pissed. So that was what the opening night of Desert Storm was like for most of us air crews. Now, here is the interesting thing. On that same evening, there were two F-18s that were heading inland, and they were looking for MiGs. And it just so happened that these F-18s were armed with sidewinders and also loaded with full bomb load. Now, the F-18 was still a relative new kid on the scene. And it ended up that night that these two F-18s engaged two MiG-23s. The pilots switched over from ground attack to the air attack mode. Within about 40 seconds, the engagement was over. The MiGs were in the desert. The pilots switched back over to ground attack mode, dropped their loads at air bases, and took off and went home. It was the very first time in history that any kind of aircraft entered into an engagement with a full bomb load. And that began the legacy of the F-18. And we realized we are in trouble because the F-14 isn't going to be a player for too many years. We were a little bit wrong. It would be maybe, I don't know, another 8 years or so before the F-14s began getting phased out. But I'll tell you what a great airplane the F-18 was. Now, here's another thing about the F-14s that we were flying. Can you advance? I forget what the next one. I don't want anybody getting bored with, okay, there's the Kuwaiti region and the Persian Gulf. It's kind of hard for me to explain, and I'm hoping you all are looking at maps, the maps. That's what I was counting on because, to be honest with you, I don't remember half of the Arabic names, and I couldn't say half of them. But this gives you a good idea of where our operational area took place. There is another thing I'd like to point out about what it was like flying in the F-14 in the Gulf War as well. We had a little bit of a problem with the F-14s. To any plane aficionados that might know, the F-14A model did not have a very reliable engine. It had I think it was a Pratt & Whitney F-110 engine. It was not suited to the task. And unfortunately, in the first couple years, we lost a lot of air crew. And if we didn't lose the air crew, we lost a lot of aircraft. I know because I was almost one of those. And what happened is, by the 1980s, around 1985-ish, 86, they decided to go with an improved version with an improved engine in the F-14A. And they were going to designate it the F-14B. Well, along the way, they found that the new engine that they were going to try wasn't working. Not only that, the engine wasn't really fitting well into the existing A models. But one thing that they did that was really cool is they upgraded our radar. They upgraded our direct landing control in the aircraft, which made it much easier. We didn't have to worry about changing attitude so much when we were getting ready to trap. It was an easier plane to fly. But there's still that doggone F-110 engine that we had to deal with. Even the Pratt & Whitney engineers couldn't figure out what to do with it. So what did they do? They slapped them back in the F-14As, and they called our planes the F-14A+. It wasn't good enough to be a B model, but we're going to make you an A+. Oh, and by the way, guys, you're stuck with this crappy engine. So after about 40 hours of flight time, they were in maintenance about twice that time. So you can see how reliable they were. I had an experience, just really quickly, I'll relate it. We were over the Indian Ocean when I was on the Nimitz. We had just come out of a supersonic engagement. We were on maneuvers. We came out of a Mach 1.1 dash, and about 30 seconds after we came out of Mach, the whole aircraft shuddered. Port engine goes, no, it was the starboard engine went down first. Like, okay, we can recover from this. A minute later, a port engine goes out. Oops. So here we are, we're trying to slow down. By this time, we're barely under 500 knots. We're about 30,000 feet, and the pilot gave the order, we're out of here. Folks, to best describe a ejection from an F-14 at just under 500 knots is like a fly hitting a windshield. The first thing after we were picked up, after about 45 minutes of kind of wading around in the Indian Ocean, first thing they did was take us to the flight docks. I was so bruised, I looked like I was in a bar brawl. In fact, I looked like a raccoon. I had black bands under my eyes. My eyes were bloodshot. Where my respirator was around my nose and my cheeks and my chin was this 1/8-inch deep depression, and my ribs were bruised, and I had bruises from my equipment. My military sidearm that I carried over here had actually got pressed in, and I had the silhouette of my weapon that went through my web gear, all my survival gear, and left an impression that lasted for 2 days. That is what an ejection at almost 500 knots is like. It hurts. And today it still hurts. Ask my wife, she'll tell you that I'm not normal. So, anyway, I'm sorry I'm all over the place. I really had a hard time trying to think about how am I going to tell so much and try to keep everybody engaged and keep it within a decent time limit. So anyway, let's keep on with Desert Storm. What did I have on there next? Oh yes, that's taken out of the back of a tanker as we're getting ready to pull in and get some gas, which you do quite frequently over the desert. And as you can tell, it's not very scenic. So Desert Storm was one of those things when you hit water, you were happy because, oh my God, blue. I'm tired of looking at, brown and orange and red and, and the occasional plume going up from something exploding. So let's kind of go a little bit more forward, and we're going to go into about the 3rd week of Desert Storm. No, that's too far forward. Let's back up yet. I don't want to get into that yet. That's one of the things that I've had to live with for a while. Let's talk a little bit more about the F-14 and its place in Desert Storm. The F-15s and F-16s that the Air Force had around northern and central Iraq engaged in a lot of dogfighting. Throughout Desert Storm, those aircraft engaged right around 300 Iraqi aircraft. They shot down, let me back up, they shot down about 300 Iraqi aircraft, and a little over 200 were taken out on the ground. And I was talking to Randy earlier this evening, and he said, wow, I had no idea the Iraqis had that many aircraft. Yes, they did. They had, and see if I remember correctly, they had French Mirage F-1s, MiG-23s, MiG-25s, and MiG-29s. And the thing about the MiG-29 that frustrated a lot of the Navy crews and the Air Force crews is if you look at the MiG-29 at a certain altitude, it almost looks like an F-18. So if you got a lock and you went to engage one of those, you sure as heck better hope you didn't commit fratricide. That's the one thing none of us wanted to live with, was shooting down fellow crew, whether they were Air Force, because in a way they even had a silhouette a lot like an F-16 until they began to turn and you'd see the twin tails coming up off of them. So they were kind of tricky, and I don't mind telling you that the Iraqi pilots, these guys were no sham either. They had been 10 years fighting Iran. Their best pilots were put into the MiG-25s and the MiG-29s, and I'm going to tell you something. These guys knew how to fight. They were trained well. They used Soviet tactics. I mean, they were just the most recognizable tactics. Good pilots knew how to use them, except the MiG-25 pilots on 2 occasions had a little bit of a problem. There were a couple of F-15s, I believe, one day near the border with Turkey, and they engaged a couple of MiG-25s. One of the MiG-25s, for some reason, at 3,000 feet, decided to do a split S this way. The thrust-to-weight ratio on a MiG-25 in combat was not that great. He slammed into the ground. The other one was killed with a Sidewinder. On one of the cover missions that we were on, one of our crews in VF-41 engaged MiG-29s. Same thing happened. Why these guys decided at 3,000 or 4,000 feet to pull a split S, going at almost Mach 1, and think they were going to pull out of it was stupid. Because these guys, and I remember seeing some of the after-action reports, up until then, these Iraqi pilots were awesome. They were giving these guys a run for their money, and it was frustrating the hell out of some of the F-14 crews. So we did have a certain amount of respect for them. But by the same token, the F-14, and what did I have? Oh, I have the other picture after this, don't I? Okay. The thing about the F-14 is we also had an issue where we didn't have a lot to do in Desert Storm other than combat air patrols. We flight a lot of cover missions. We did a lot of patrolling. We did a lot of searching for things. And one thing that was really great, and this is why Desert Storm is also called one of those engagements that was textbook military. We were allowed to do almost anything we wanted. Targets of opportunity, you go after it. Just let the airborne command centers know, hey, I'm picking this up. You know, do we have a go after it? Yes, you do. All right, we're going to kill something today. But as an F-14 crew member, most of us were getting very frustrated because we were finding that a lot of the aircraft flying over Kuwait and southern Iraq did not want to engage us. They would see the F-14, and I don't know, maybe these guys saw Top Gun. I don't know. But they did not want to engage us. And I can't tell you how many times I would get a lock, and what I had in the back seat, to kind of give you an idea of what I had in the back seat of an F-14, I had a radar scope, which was about a 7-inch diameter scope, and up above it I had my triple D, which was a detailed data display, and that would give me more definition either on a ground target or an air target, depending on what mode I was in, whether I was in infrared or any other band. And the thing that was great too is being in an F-14A+, we also had advanced radar which picked up to the most, actually down to the fraction of a millimeter. It was a very, very accurate radar. But I would pick up a flight of MiGs coming in, and at one time I had 35 MiGs coming at us. We had about, let's see, we were a patrol of about 8 F-14s, and 4 of us broke off, and we decided what we were going to do is we were going to try to get the group to split. Half of them to follow one group, half of them the other half to follow us. It was particularly frustrating because I picked up their radar in my helmet, in my headset. The minute I picked them up, I put my targeting acquisition onto automatic, and boom, it immediately hit. I could pick up about 4 or 5 MiGs at one time. The minute they noticed I had a lock on them, they turned tails and they took off. Most of the time they took off toward Iran. They did not want to engage the F-14. So what happened was we continued to fly cover, but the F-14 though was valuable in another way. In the 1980s, it was decided that this neat little instrument called a TARPS pod would be installed on the F-14. TARPS is Tactical Airborne Reconnaissance, the Tactical Airborne Reconnaissance Pod System. TARPS was great. It was almost a 1,900-pound unit that fit where our aft Sparrow missiles would be housed, and it was about 16.5 feet long. It had 3 cameras. It was great for doing about a Mach 1.5 run at about 1,500 to 3,000 feet, and it could take several pictures. And by the time we got back to the carrier, it only took 13 minutes for the film to be processed. So we ended up flying a lot of recce missions. But the great thing about it is we still were armed with our Sidewinder missiles. So if by chance we were flying a recce mission and we came across a target of opportunity, as in other aircraft, then we could go after them with that baby slung in and maybe take a few pictures, you know, of them giving us a finger or something, you know, for good measure. So, but it got to be very frustrating because toward the middle of the war, by about the 3rd week, we just did not know what to do with ourselves. So a bunch of us went to our CAG and said, look, what can we do that will help support the ground forces more and will help support the A6s a lot more that are going in? And they said, we'll tell you what, how about if we have you guys for a couple weeks not fly recce missions, what about if we arm you with bombs? We're like, bombs? But we're fighter interceptors. Well, okay, this is the problem with the end of a Cold War. There's nobody to fight. And as I said earlier, the Iraqis did not want to engage us. So they put bombs on us. we did quite well with bombs. And I think the great legacy of the F-14 is that what started out as a fighter interceptor designed solely for fleet defense and bomber interception, which during the Cold War we intercepted a lot of the Russian Bears over the Atlantic. Our legacy is that we actually did quite well in the bomber role. What a complete change from the original mission of the F-14. So I guess what I'm saying is Desert Storm gave us the opportunity to fulfill almost every role that other crews would have fulfilled. And you know what, guys? I don't know, no pun intended, it was a blast. I mean, it really was. What a great time to have been a naval aviator. We did everything with that F-14. So, Desert Storm is going on. By this time, the Wisconsin, let's go back to the Wisconsin and the Missouri for a moment. They are just blasting the living daylights out of Iraqi positions. So one day, we get orders, hey guys, how about if you go out and let's orbit around the battleships and make sure nothing comes after them. We got a particularly long mission for them coming up. Okay. Kids, I'm here to tell you, if you've never seen a battleship fire 16-inch shells, you don't know what you're missing. We were orbiting, I think we were over the Red Sea. Yeah, I think we were over the Red Sea. And the Missouri was letting loose with salvo after salvo. We were about, I think, 3,000 feet up, and if I remember, probably within a half-mile distant. We were keeping away as we were orbiting. And we got the word that make sure no aircraft are in front of the Missouri at X altitude or distance. That thing let loose, and from where I was sitting, you could literally see the shock wave coming out of the barrels as those shells were being lobbed into Iraq. Not only that, I swear I saw the ship slip every time she fired her guns. There is nothing more magnificent than seeing a battleship in action. And it was not lost on me, the power, because I also realized we were going to be the last fighting force to ever see battleships in action in the history of this country. And just what a, I mean, I get tingles thinking about it now. I mean, it's amazing. And here's the irony of it. The next day, they fit our Tomcats with the TARPS pods. Oh, and by the way, we had a really neat little thing that the crews took to calling us. We were called Peeping Toms. And they even designed a little badge for us when we took on that role. And they had a cat with binoculars, and you could see big eyes in the end of it. It was pretty cool. I still wish I had that patch. But the next day, we got orders to fly damage assessment. You think seeing those guns fire was something? You ought to see the craters those things leave. I mean, I cannot believe whatever was at the end of those salvos, they never knew what hit them. I mean, I don't even think they were atomic particles when we got done with them. It was absolutely incredible and complete devastation. So that was part of a mission that was absolutely essential for us as well, which I wasn't too happy flying bomb damage assessments because we all know that during Vietnam, that came to be kind of a joke. But for us, it was very effective because that went to the commanders, and in that way, they knew they were hitting their targets. But doggone it, there were still those pesky SAM sites that the Iraqis had. And I got to hand it to the Iraqis. They learned well because they had mobile sites, which on one hand was brilliant, but on the other hand was sheer stupidity. Because what happens when you fire a surface-to-air missile in sand? You leave a dust cloud. So it was very easy for us to see that and call in an A6 strike. So, you know, shame on them. Great for us. So That was one mission that, while at times boring and trying, it was essential. Those were also some very hard missions to fly as well, because I believe by about near the last week of the war, I think we were flying 14-hour missions. And that's tough to do when you're crammed in the back seat of an F-14. Our crews virtually had to carry us out of the cockpits. We got down. It was very, very hard to walk around on a flight deck. And all you wanted to do was lay down and die, but you had those damn debriefs. So it got to be a real pain in the rear. But it was interesting because, again, that war, in looking back on it now, we didn't realize the impact it was going to have in the whole region, because on the one hand, it was essential that we protect Saudi Arabia. I got some great stories of what it was like in Riyadh. Maybe that's for another time, but they are interesting people, to say the least. And I have gone to the bathroom in a gold-plated bathroom. It's interesting. But, you know, I came to realize that on the one hand, it helped calm their fears. Yes, we were getting rid of an Arab neighbor that they were sworn not to attack because Muslim law prohibited it. Figure that out. Somebody didn't tell Hussein that. But on the other hand, the Middle East began to hate us, because by the time Iraqi freedom began taking place in '93, I think the collective conscience of the Arabic people was, we hit and run. I don't think we did much to build the trust, and least of all during the 2003 invasion. From the standpoint of the Iraqi people, we didn't do a whole hell of a lot to build confidence in that conflict. But it was an absolutely amazing time to be in aviation. I mean, everything that could be done right was done right. We were very lucky. There were no great incidences. I don't know how many of you know this. I think somewhere on YouTube or on the internet, there is a video of, I believe it's a maintenance person working on an A6 on the Roosevelt, and he gets sucked into an intake. I believe it was the port intake. I was there the night that happened. We had just finished debrief. We were walking out on the deck to, I was going to make sure that our ordnance was all tucked in nice and ready to go. And all of a sudden I hear this explosion and I see this huge flash coming out of the port engine of an A6. I'm like, whoever that was is mincemeat. I don't know, this son of a gun was the luckiest person, because the next thing I know, they're pulling this guy out of there. They had a bunch of red shirts and grapes. And if any of you are familiar with the term, the grapes are fuelers on carriers, and the red shirts are the ordnance people. They were pulling this guy out by his feet. His helmet was mangled, but all the guy did was shake it off. And my understanding was all he got was some cuts and bruises. That goes to show the advancements made even in safety equipment, because carrier operations in the daytime is one thing. If anybody, and Randy may know this, you never get used to night operations. I hated night operations with a passion. But the best that I can say is that a carrier during combat operations is like a chaotic ballet. And when you figure that the greatest majority of these carriers are run by teenagers, that's quite a testament. When you realize, and it was no different during Desert Storm. I had a lot of guys that were under me that were 18 and 19-year-olds on their crews for the first time, and they were in combat for the first time. And that's the thing about being a leader, is when they see you're not scared, that instills a confidence in them. And there's always the plane captains that say, you will bring my plane back in one piece, won't you, sir? They never let you forget it's their plane. And yes, we brought them back. And we had some of the guys swear that there were two things that helped us do that. It was tradition in VF-84 that before the crews took flight, that we go touch Jack. We're going to go back to Jack for a moment. I told you about the skull and crossbones. We carried Jack with us on every cruise. Before we went up on a sortie, we always touched the case that Jack's bones were in. And I guess it didn't hurt that the chaplains always blessed the aircraft. And there wasn't one sortie I went on that the chaplain hadn't stood in front of the aircraft and was going down the line and blessing all the aircraft. I had never seen, I thought this was stuff that you just see on TV, but these guys were really doing it. So some of the guys, if you believe in Providence, they really thought that's what helped us. On the Roosevelt, we were fortunate. We didn't lose any crews. On the America, I believe the America lost an F-18 in the desert. The Saratoga was there. The Saratoga lost 2 F-14s. There are little things that you didn't hear about at home that were very much kept secret, and which is interesting because there's a lot of things that I was involved in my capacity as a REO, and I held a certain position as well in our group. I had a very good relationship with my CAG. Didn't hurt my career much. And there were things that I knew so that when the 2003 invasion took place, I wasn't shocked. Because if you folks knew exactly how many sorties we flew in recce mode, I can tell you, I knew then what it was being used for. So the 2003 invasion was not too surprising to me. So anyway, let's kind of cut to the chase here. And am I going too fast for anybody? I realize, again, I told my wife, I was really almost intimidated because I've never really talked about this publicly. There's a lot that's rattling around up there, and I had a very hard time, and to be honest with you, I'm shocked I haven't gone into my notes. I had a ton of notes that I sat here and wrote, and I haven't had to look at them once.
Keep it up, because you're not I don't think any of us are born with it.
I do have to tell you, though, about one engagement we did have, and it may surprise some of you to know that, yes, Tony is a recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross, not once but twice. My wife is the only one that has known that. I keep it quiet because, like most people, thank you, there are three things I'm very proud of. It is that, but I never talk about it because I am, number one, humble, and number two, we were just crews doing our job. My first one, though, I won during our attack on Libya as an A6 navigator bombardier. I was very young. I was only a 23-year-old lieutenant on his first cruise on the Big E, and I showed amazing calm under pressure, and we were getting surface to air coming at us like you would not believe. You would think it was somebody's birthday. There were so many candles coming at us. And I was very proud of that. My second Distinguished Flying Cross was earned when, on one of our cover missions, we had a couple A6s that were in trouble. Unfortunately, we did lose one. A couple of our guys were taken captive. They were later rescued. But the efforts of us and 2 other sections of F-14s resulted in one of the other A6s we were covering and a couple Marine A6s being able to get out of their target area, and we actually used ourselves as targets. We made Iraqi radar go after us, and I purposely shut down my radar, which my pilot for a while didn't understand why. He was a bit pissed. I actually thought that I was going to be seeing the captain's mast as a result of that. But luckily for me, the results were good. It worked. I never did it again. But the powers that be and Charles Abbott, our beloved captain of the Roosevelt, decided to recognize me and some other guys. And by the way, folks, there were other Distinguished Flying Crosses between the America, the Saratoga, and the Ranger as well. Crews won. There were a lot that went on Desert Storm, and these crews, it was very well deserved. The other thing that I was very happy to receive was the Roosevelt was awarded the Battle Star for Excellence. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but I want to mention before we go to the one thing that was total chaos. The Roosevelt flew during the duration of Desert Storm and Operation Provide Comfort, which was the the patrols of the northern and southern fly zones of Iraq when Hussein decided to go after the Kurds. And we also had to patrol southern Turkey, of all places. We flew almost 8,000 sorties. Now, Desert Storm only lasted, what, 34 days, 43 days? I don't know, I'm having a dyslexic moment here. But in that time, 8,000 sorties were flown by us. We dropped 5 million pounds of ordnance. Only the Saratoga came in a close second. No other carrier since then has dropped as much ordnance as the Roosevelt had. So we were awarded the Battle Star of Excellence, and if some of you come to Gala and you see my mini ribbons, you will notice I have a Navy E. I wear that very proudly. There was an extraordinary moment when the Roosevelt was awarded that when we came back home. And so, my hats go off to all the crews, but it was a very, very proud moment. Now, Kath, if you will. Are any of you familiar with the Highway of Death? I think this is something that had big waves at home. There are 2 pictures in here that I have. The reason I only have 2 is the ones that I would have really liked to push the point home are brutal. And when I say brutal, I'm not exaggerating. They are nasty. At the end of the war, we received intelligence from the America that forces of Hussein were beginning to move down Highway 80 and along Highway 8. But Highway 80 is the main 6-lane highway that goes between Kuwait City and Basra, and then splits and goes up into Baghdad. On the night of February 26th, which was 1 full night, almost 2 full nights before the end of hostilities, the Air Force and Navy Marine A-6s, and I believe these A-6s did fly off the Saratoga, were ordered to drop anti-tank mines. This took place very late in the evening, and they dropped anti-tank mines at the front of the column. A-6s from the Roosevelt and the America went behind the column and began bombing. Everything else in between was fair game. That night, there were probably 2,000 aircraft, Navy, Marine, and Air Force, that along the whole stretch, which was roughly, I believe, a 3-mile stretch that the convoy covered, we just decimated the hell out of it. That night, we were flying cover for the A-6s. I was not involved in the bombing of it, per se, but we were covering A-6s. We were hanging up at about 5,000 feet while our A-6s were flying lower. We were definitely on the lookout for any MiGs that were going to see it as an opportunity to come after us. I looked down, and I am here to tell you, it was nothing but a big ribbon of red and orange. For 3 miles of highway, every direction there were explosions. You could see secondary, tertiary, quadruple explosions, everything flying in every direction. That was just the first night. The second night, the same thing. When it was all over, we were ordered to fly recce flights, and we flew about a half a dozen. Some of us flew up and down Highway 80. Some of the other, I think VF-41 took Highway 8. But is that the first picture or the second one? Go into the second one. It advances. Okay, that's the second one, which doesn't look at, that was at the very front of the column, if I remember correctly. At any rate, that next morning we went out there, and there was no imminent threat in the area, so we decided not to make a mock run. We just made runs at about, I think we were probably cruising between 500 and 600 miles an hour. And we made several passes up and down the north and south end of the highway. At one point, when I put the cameras on automatic so I could kind of look out and get a better picture or a better view of things, I could not believe, my heart actually sank Now, you have to realize one thing that as naval aviators we're trained to do is we kill. That's what we do. That's why we take on the job, is we're out there to kill, period. My heart sank when I saw this because I had no idea what I was going to expect that day. So we made that run, and then we also made runs over the next couple days of Highway 8 and again over Highway 80. Apparently what happened along the way, the White House and the Pentagon began receiving the pictures from our runs. It's because of this that President Bush decided right then and there to stop the war. A lot of people think that General Schwarzkopf stopped the war short of Baghdad to save the city. That is not true. I don't know exactly what the press was telling the American public. This is the reason why. What happened is within 48 hours of the devastation getting out between Europe and the United States of what we did, we were accused of war crimes, basically. The civilian community at large was saying that we had committed a serious breach of the Geneva Convention, which states implicitly that any retreating non-combatants are allowed free passage. They thought we took advantage, and General Schwarzkopf and President Bush decided that rather than have the military look bad and make it look like we were arbitrarily shooting people in the back to end hostilities then and there. Unfortunately for me, this is really the image that I'm left with from the war, because we began getting then pictures from the Marine forces that were on the ground and some of our armored forces. The sad thing about it is nobody knows today exactly what kind of devastation we brought. Estimates have run anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 human casualties and possibly 20,000 vehicles, up to, I believe the final assessment was around 5,000 individuals and probably about 3,000 between civilian armored vehicles. Tanks only made up about probably not even 5% of what was taken out on the highway of death. So it took a little damage control to make the coalition allies realize that we weren't just, we didn't do this. We saw an imminent threat. They were running hard and they were running fast, and all we knew is that there were a lot of military vehicles involved. I talked to a Marine when we were going back to Norfolk. There was a detachment of Marines, and I talked to several Marines one afternoon who saw the carnage. And a lot of them were saying, these poor guys, there were pieces just laying all over the place. There were bodies in vehicles that had burned so badly, it's like they were welded right into the vehicles. So in the years that ensued after I left the Navy, I always wondered, what happened? Did they ever rebuild the highway? Had they ever really find out what the total damage done was? Because this is the one image that bothered me the most, seeing it firsthand. And I lived with it for a long time. It really kind of bugged the heck out of me. Because it was one thing when Hussein was putting civilians around anti-aircraft emplacements. We knew that was going to happen. We knew that collateral damage was going to be a fact of life. You tried to avoid it, but it was going to happen. I didn't expect to see anything like this. So at any rate, these Marines said that it was the most horrendous thing they had even seen. And one Marine described it as one area where it was like a river of blood on the side of the highway. There was so much blood. You could have just taken buckets and buckets and probably painted every vehicle that was there. So anyway, fast forwarding, I talked to somebody that was in the 2003 invasion. And the 2003 invasion, part of the route was on Highway 80. And he said that to this day, all the burned out husks of the vehicles are pulled off to the sides of the highway as a reminder. They're all there. And he said, I don't know how many there are, but he said as far as the eye could see. And he says there's no way there was under 10,000 vehicles that were involved, just trying to guess it. So it was a particularly brutal time. So, you know, it kind of gave me some closure hearing that. Yeah, a lot of civilians were killed, but then again, Hussein took a lot of civilians and just threw them into the fight. The Republican Guard units, oh folks, they were awesome. And I mean, from the standpoint of someone on my side, these guys knew how to fight. They were trained well. Do I feel bad for the civilians? Yeah, years later I do. But at the time, I mean, we had to do what we had to do. We had no idea. And so, you know, end result. But let's go to happier times, shall we? So, let's... All right. That's my wife being a smart aleck. I love Darth Vader. For any of you that know, that used to be her ringtone on the phone. Let's go to last year. My partner in crime, Bob Catalano, he knows someone who had been on the Enterprise back after I believe I was. And he says, what do you think about going to the inactivation ceremony? The Enterprise had finished her last cruise, and I said, sure, let's do it. And that's okay. You can kind of keep on scrolling through. We don't need to hear Darth, because I don't breathe that heavily. And if I do breathe that heavily, I won't tell you why. Anyway, I picked some pictures that I really liked from there. And Bob, hearing that, you know, our little almost incident with Mr. Shatner. Anyway, I found the going to see the Enterprise in Norfolk for the last time to be bittersweet. Seeing her for the last time really brought my life full circle. As I stated earlier, I saw combat for the first time on Enterprise. We're in one of our WestPac cruises where it was going to be about a 9 or 12 month, what I always call Tony's Around the World tour. We were going everywhere. And along the way, somebody said, hey, Muammar Gaddafi's throwing a party and wants to know if he can bring the candles. And we said, why, yes, thank you. So I saw combat on the Enterprise. She was my introduction into carrier life. I began loving it even more. Now, don't take my word for it, because you can talk to a lot of guys that were in the Navy that said, it sucked. They told me I was going to see the world, and I was 4 stories below deck. Well, I don't know what to tell you. You know, I was in hell for 13 weeks. Top that. I don't know. So, seeing her was great because of Bob's connection. We got to kind of sit with the hoi polloi. If you look forward to the superstructure, the starboard elevator, just about a midship in front of the island there, is where they had seating for VIPs set up. So we were rubbing elbows with some really cool people. And I loved it, because to walk in the hangar deck of the Enterprise, let alone to walk on to that hangar, which I had elevator, which I had walked on so many times, really just gave me goosebumps all over. It was so cool. And also realizing that it would be the last time we'd probably ever see that ship intact. And for most of you that may not know, because there's usually a semantics error here, the Enterprise is not decommissioned, she's inactivated. What that means is inactivation occurs when they are going to punch holes in her and take out her nuclear fuel. They need to get all that taken out, and then she's going to get towed to Bremerton, Washington, where she will formally be decommissioned in, Bob, 2015, was it? In 2015, and then I don't know if they're going to cut her up and sink her for a coral reef or not, but there was also something that was really cool in the midst of all this. The Abraham Lincoln and the Theodore Roosevelt were also in Norfolk. The Roosevelt was right across from that starboard elevator. And not only was it announced that the name Enterprise will live again in the new Enterprise in a few years, that is going to be an absolutely awesome ship. And by the way, bigger than this ship. But the Roosevelt now is, well, it is now the Roosevelt Battle Group. Her flag was transferred from Enterprise to Roosevelt after we left the ceremony. And when I got home, I told Kathy, how cool is it to see the first and last ships that you were on in port at the same time to witness two historical moments going. I mean, guys, is that cool or what? You know? And there was hardly a dry eye in the place. That was looking aft at the aft elevator on the starboard side, and that was the ceremonial disembarkation of the last people on the Enterprise. And I'm telling you, I was looking around, and I'm looking at former crew, pilots, and senators blubbering like babies, because it hit you to see them coming down the gangplank for the last time. And then that was it. The ship was going to be buttoned up, and they were going to get ready to move her to get the nuclear fuel and stuff out of her. And here's another interesting thing about this. The Enterprise now is gone for a while. Of course, she was the only ship in her class. She was very expensive, so there was an Enterprise class. That was it. But out of the ships that between the Med, the Persian Gulf, and the Red Sea that were there with Roosevelt, the Roosevelt is the only one still afloat. All the America just a couple years ago was sunk as a reef. The Ranger, the Midway, that's the one I forgot was there. The Midway was there. So the Midway is gone. The Ranger is gone. The Saratoga is gone. But through it all, there's the Roosevelt. So I thought that that would be kind of a fitting way to end my presentation tonight by bidding a farewell to these guys. And I'm sure for Randy, who was on the Enterprise too, it has some meaning. She's a very famous ship, and I'm sure that a lot of history now will be made with the Roosevelt as well. She's going to be great in her position now as head of the fleet there. So cool stuff. So if I haven't confused the hell out of you guys tonight with me being scattered, that's it for me. Anybody have any questions? Oh, the Scuds that went into Riyadh, and yeah, the Scud missile attacks is another thing that we didn't chase any Scuds while we were over there. We left that up to the Patriot missile batteries. Riyadh was fairly well protected, although, what is I can't think of the Arabian city just off of the Persian Gulf that was hit one night by a Scud attack, and 60 American troops were killed that night, and I believe the majority of them were Air Force. There is one thing I'd like to add. Speaking of Scud attacks, Tel Aviv was hit quite a bit, and it's no secret how much Hussein hated the Israelis. We did manage to keep the Israelis out of the fight, and I think it may surprise some of you if you don't know. We had standing orders that if any Israeli F-15s or F-16s entered the theater to shoot them down. We were told not to bother being friendly, take them out now, because there was widespread fear that if the Israelis got into it, it would also drag Syria into the fight, and that the whole thing would be a complete Middle Eastern theater, and we did not want to see that happen. We didn't want Jordan getting into it. We didn't want Egypt being involved, even though they're way over in another place. So we did have standing orders. So if you've never heard that before, it's coming from me.
But they still, the Syrians and Jordan are all involved.
They are, absolutely, they are all involved. And that's one of the things about what has happened, you know, in these intervening years. And, you know, also I find it interesting because I believe our entry, or our big entry into the Middle East theater happened with the bombing in Beirut of the Marine compound in 1983. And I used to know a couple people over at Ford Motor. One had two of them had brothers that were there that were killed in that compound. And I always felt that that was our entry into the conflict over there. But for me personally, I feel that in '86, when we attacked Libya, that is really when it all began. I don't know. I guess that's up to history, and it's up to each individual as they look at history to decide. But, yes, sir.
You're fighting with them back.
You know what? Yeah, decades earlier, and nobody seemed to learn that if the British couldn't lick him, nobody could. And that's the sad truth, you know, about it. And the other thing, too, about the Middle East theater, we had been trained so long to fight Soviets. It was in our heads that if we were ever going to get shot down, we were going to get shot down in forest. We had trained to survive in European forests. And when everything changed in '86 and our training changed, it was not lost on any of us where we were really going to be. Without the Soviet Union, after the collapse, the Middle East really, really went nuts. And a lot of us saw firsthand just how intertwined the Soviet Union and these Middle Eastern nations were. It's sad, and you know, I'm still sad today in a way to see our troops having to fight something that, and I hate to say it, and please bear with me here, because I support our troops. I will always support our troops. I'm Navy through and through. I'm very pro-military. I was raised military. My dad fought at way. It forever changed his life. I don't like what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I don't want to make this a political thing. This is just an opinion of someone that fought in a conflict where it seemed like we did everything right and we were given everything we wanted. Unfortunately, I do feel that it went the way of Vietnam. I understand why comparisons have been made, but never, ever, folks, let that hinder your support of our troops, because I'm going to tell you what, after being there, I sure as hell wouldn't want to be back there again.
And have our troops over there at all.
Yeah, and I agree. There's too much now. And you know what? That's the sad fact, and it's true. After the Soviet Union, we really did lose sight of that. It's a very sad fact. But you know what? I believe that what we did was a good job, and our troops now are doing what they believe in, and let the politicians sort it out. It's a shame, as any of us that have been in combat know. It's unfortunate these all have to be decided in blood.
Shoot the politicians.
But, so. Yay, I didn't need my notes. All this work for nothing.
Now, do you know the F-14s flew in Vietnam also?
Oh, by the way, Randy, thank you. This is why, yeah, when I noticed that Randy had me scheduled for tonight, I was honored, and it was also a coincidence because our gala commemorating the anniversary of our recognized entry into Vietnam, 50 years. Well, most of you may not know that while the F-14 kind of came along too late for Vietnam, the USS Enterprise in '73 and '74 were out there, and some of the last naval combat missions were flown by F-14s from VF-1 and VF-2. So again, there's that pesky Enterprise. And the Missouri was there.
I was their ship's company with.
So there you go. Yep. So, all right. Well, thank you, everybody. Oh, yeah, I forgot about the question and answer if we have time here. I did not meet Steven Seagal, but I did meet Brooke Shields.
Whoa!
When Bob Hope gave his tours during Desert Storm, they went to the America First. And it just so happened I was standing down for 24 hours. I was exhausted. And we found out Bob Hope was coming. So guess who tried to get one of the front seats? Wasn't too successful, but I did get to meet her. And she was a looker. And just so you know, speaking of, I never met Tom Cruise. I never met Kelly McGillis. But it is a lie. Naval aviators do not sit around bars singing, "You've Got That Loving Feeling," drinking beer. We stood around in Yokohama drinking sake, chasing Oriental girls. That's the truth. Ask my wife. She told me I talked one night. So, any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Oh, yeah.
One more. Hey, when the Blue Angels were here last, I was eating with those mechanics from the Blue Angels. I said, hey, what was faster? I said, the F-14 or the F-18? And they thought the F-14 was faster because of the wing.
Yes. The fact that we had a variable geometry wing put us at almost at Mach 3 point. The F-18 will do about Mach 2 in a good run. But yep. Oh, yeah. But that was also the other thing. Just real quickly, I got to tell you, the F-14 was hard on the body. I remember one night when we got a lock, no, it was an afternoon, we got a lock on MiG-23s. And as they were coming in under us, my pilot decided to go inverted and we did a split S going down. We were pulling about 5 Gs. There are good Gs and there are bad Gs. These were bad Gs. I mean, you don't think about it afterwards because you're too intense in what you're doing in the cockpit. But afterwards, I'm thinking to myself, I'm sore. And I realize, I'm looking at everything and I'm like, oh my God, we just hit 5 Gs. This is nuts. But yeah, yep, so we had that capability, which was awesome. Yep. F-14 was a great plane.
Well, it looked pretty tough in Top Gun, the way he was jerking around in the back seat all the time.
Oh, and by the way, that's another thing. We did not go inverted, giving the Russians a finger, canopy to canopy. We flew about 50 yards off and then flipped them the bird.
So did you want to talk a little bit about intercepting the bears?
If I have time, if you want me to. Toward the end of the Soviet era especially, we flew a lot over the Atlantic. And a lot of the things that we did is the P-3s and the S-3 Vikings that were loaded with harpoons that were trying to chase subs. And, it was always a game of shadow dancing with both sides. The Russians, every once in a while, would slip in the ever so famous bomber, the Bear. And there is an interesting little story. One time, we were sent up to intercept a bear. And so we're just cruising along nonchalantly, and as we're pulling up just after the bear, we were coming up on our starboard side, and the bear in some configurations had this really huge observation bubble just behind the wing. Actually, I think it was just after the bomb bay. And we're pulling up, and I'm looking over there, and I'm taking a look at my radar to make sure they're not arming anything. And I'm looking, and I'm kind of like, there's like 3 crewmen in the observation bubble. I'm trying to figure out what the hell they're waving at us. So I asked my driver, I says, why don't we kind of nudge in a little bit closer to this bear? So we got in within like probably 30 to 40 yards, which is extremely close. And especially at the speed we had to slow down. So anyway, I'm looking over there. I asked my driver, I says, I don't know if I'm seeing things, but I said, I got 3 Russians over here. One's waving the American flag, one's holding up a bottle of Coke, and the other one's giving me the finger. And he says, nope. He says, this is happening. Again, I mean, you can't write this stuff for Hollywood. This crap went on all the time. And I think that, but you know what? These guys, they were always nonchalant. The minute we intercepted them, they just kind of looked over, smiled, waved, and we'd escort them out, and that was pretty much it. So it was pretty dull chasing those guys around.
You should have tried booning him back.
Yeah, but that's one of those great Cold War stories, guys, that really did happen. And I mean, to this day, that image is just burned in me. And the funny thing is the Russian that was holding his finger up, I swear, was missing his 2 front teeth. And he's just laughing his butt off. I mean, you had to see this thing. It was hilarious. So they were not without their sense of humor. And to be honest with you, we had a great deal of respect for the Soviet pilots, because I can remember many times being on maneuvers with Great Britain. In fact, Operation Bright Star, we actually had maneuvers with Egypt and Egyptian, British, and Indian forces. And that was the one time I got to see the pyramids from the air, and seeing the Great Pyramid from about 1,500 feet's a treat. Well, anyway, we had some Soviet, I can't remember what these were. I want to say Su-27s that intercepted us. And I'm going to tell you something. These guys were incredible pilots. What they could do with an airplane was just nuts. I mean, what you think would normally break an aircraft apart, these guys didn't even faze them. So if we ever had gone to war with Russia, there are 2 things. Yes, we did carry nuclear ordnance. Second of all, they would have been terrific fighters. And I believe at that time, our life expectancy, if we let loose with our nuclear ordnance, was about 34 seconds. So, and that was limited ordnance. We're talking about a nuclear blast in about a 25 to 50 mile radius. So we knew we were going to die. So the good story is that at least we didn't fight them. It would have been a tough fight.